Welcome to Future Sense Now, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. An e-zine of the Futures Forum live online. We exchange ideas, information, and inspiration about the futures we want. Get Future Sense Now with host Dr. Claire Nelson, futurist and editor of Human Futures.
Greetings and welcome to Future Sense Now, an online e-magazine of the Futures Forum. We're live, we're online. It is March 2020 and we're celebrating Women's History Month with an exploration into the future history of women 2030 and beyond. And why 2030? Well, United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5 speaks specifically to the development and inclusion of women. And we've seen in recent years social and political movements such as #MeToo, #TimesUp, and this year's hashtag for this celebration, #EachForEqual. But what might we expect in a world of Industry 4.0? How might we give consideration to how these technologies and the global ever-evolving challenges might create new opportunities for women? In this segment, I will speak to Dr. LEITH DUNN. She is a senior lecturer at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, Institute for Gender and Development Studies. This is the only unit which delivers bachelor's levels gender and development programs in the Caribbean, which prepares our graduates to mainstream gender in development policies and programs throughout the region. She also teaches and supervises postgraduate students from various disciplines conducting research on gender-related issues and conducts gender awareness training. More importantly, her work over the last 25 years has included several books, book chapters, and articles on various gender-related issues, including human trafficking, child labor, gender and trade, women's entrepreneurship development, the rights of household workers, gender and ICTs, gender and climate change, and the list goes on. And for our Each for Equal moment, equality in leadership and governance. She has been named by apolitical.com one of the 100 most influential persons globally promoting equality and gender policies. So without further ado, let me welcome Dr. LEITH L. Dunn, now in Botswana, originally from Jamaica. So we're going to get a very hopefully diverse perspective of what her viewpoint is. So welcome, Dr. LEITH. How are you?
Thank you very much, Dr. Nelson, and I'm honored to be asked to participate in your Futures program.
Yeah, I'm so excited about talking to you. One of the things we want to do in this series is really look at diverse perspectives of the future of women from the world. This whole project started with a book that came out, I forget when, it was a very famous book on the futures of women. And it was a very Eurocentric perspective. So in starting this project since 2014, I really made an effort to find very diverse perspectives, very diverse sectors, very diverse experiences, in order to kind of create a map eventually of what actually that mesh of women's experiences might look like. So as you think about goal number 5, which talks about end all discrimination, eliminate all forms of violence, eliminate all harmful practices, recognize unpaid work, all of these things that is your daily work for the last 25 years, you've been thinking all these things. How do you see 2030 emerging? How do you think we are going to be in 2030? Do you think we're approaching that?
Well, thank you very much for that historical perspective. And I have certain goals that I've been trying to support. So for example, for 2030, I would like to see a significant narrowing in the level of the poverty statistics globally. And when you empower women, you really empower humanity. So reduce poverty in all its forms, not just in terms of economic poverty, but in terms of equal access to technology, finances, training, and so on is one of the areas. Another thing for me is access to sexual and reproductive health and services, because as the ICPD program of action tells us, if women can decide when and if they want to have children, how to space them, they're better in control of their own fertility and can manage better. You spoke about my work on economic empowerment, women's economic empowerment. A study done with the International Labour Organization, the Jamaica Employers Federation. Now, many of our financial institutions, those offering technical support, are helping with small businesses, but they don't use a gender perspective. And what's happening is that there's a gap between what they're doing and the needs that the women have. So the funding might be there, but the women are not accessing it. So by 2030, I'd like to see a narrowing of that whole relationship, which means that women will have better and more equal opportunity to access the resources they need to start a business, as well as build their business, get more government contracts for procurement, scale up their business, and also use the digital space so they can sit from their homes or wherever they are to earn money. And of course, you know that climate change and disaster risk management is critical. Small island developing states like those in the Caribbean really need to have climate change adaptation. We're seeing every single day, Dr. Nelson, evidence of climate change, despite those who would pretend that it's not real. And therefore, by 2030, I would like to see a lot more resources available, a lot more knowledge being adapted so people can, in fact, survive the various impacts of climate change and be less likely to lose lives in disasters. You know, we're going to have the challenges, but if we're equipped to be able to deal with them, that will help. I wouldn't be able to look at 2030 without wanting to see a reduction in violence against women and girls. Very critical because we have a pandemic. We have just seen Weinstein and others being convicted. And that should send a signal that it's not business as usual. So the Me Too movement and all of those, we should be able to see more respect for women. Women should be able to go about safely. Girls should not be getting pregnant through rape and incest and all of those kind of things. So those for me are some of the issues that I'd like to see achieved by 2030. We won't eliminate all of that evil and so on, but I would like to see a lot more policies in place, a lot more governments putting the resources, but also private sector and civil society working towards the same page and reducing those risks for women. And of course, we all benefit from that.
Yeah, I want to drill down a little bit on the economic piece, because I think for me, that's one of the ones that I probably most familiar with or concerned about. We talk about poverty and we're looking at small island development states, in this case, in the future of women, then in small island development states. And I want to probably broaden our perspective to the entire 54 nation or 54 member grouping that consider themselves small island development states. And I'm wondering if we might want to see also, or how might, I would say, the continuing IMF World Bank policies, do they actually support, in reality, this space for small islands to allow that poverty gap to be narrowed, be men or women, quite frankly, in this point. It's not a woman's issue anymore in this case. I mean, yes, we might have gender. But is there that gap? Because one of the people who I admire, whose work I admire, Kate Raworth, she had put out this idea called donut economics. I'm wondering if white hasn't taken up more space in the conversation. I'm wondering, is it because she's a woman, white hasn't taken up more space in the conversation? Because to me, it's so simple to understand that the donut that says we have to have an economic system that doesn't go past the planetary boundaries of our safety. And if we have said that there are these levels of life that we want all humans to live, there's a level of dignity we can't go below, then our acceptable life is in this donut. So 2030 agendas all around the world have to be designed in this donut. And yet we see, in the case of Jamaica, this touted fantastic growth, but we don't see the inclusion. How do you think women's leadership? We talk about women in leadership. Jamaica is touted for having a lot of women in leadership, but is there like a feminine approach to economics and policy, or a gender lens and economic policy that might help us change those things? So we're a complex question, but hopefully you can unpack your own question.
Okay, lots of issues. For a number of years, I've been part of an international organization called International Association for Feminist Economics. Feminist Economics. You have leading economists who have been providing alternative analyses of the global system, globalization, the workspace, and so on. And you can look at their website, IAFFE, but it is a very inclusive space for women of diverse backgrounds to look at what the alternatives are. So some of them have been advisors to governments, they work in universities, they work in civil society organizations. And my hope is that more of that feminist economics agenda would be mainstreamed. So we here in Botswana, they've just done gender analysis, not a gender analysis, but an analysis of the budgets. We did one like that. Dr. Michael Witter did one in Jamaica some years ago. And efforts have been made to do a feminist reading of the budgets. How does it differentially impact males and females of different backgrounds, ages, and so on, right? But we have not yet mainstreamed those differentials into economic policies. The Commonwealth Secretariat has done, guidelines, books. People like Mariama Williams has done a lot of work. Mariama and the South Institute, and yet the mainstream economics is not taking on board these differentials. I was hopeful when Ms. Lagarde at the IMF had suggested that, they want to have a more inclusive environment. She has moved on. I don't know if it's, been entrenched or what have you. But we had an interesting conference in Jamaica, and that was part of what, was done. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying that the economic aspect of it, or economic policies, have not yet adequately considered the differentials. And we're not talking about kitchen projects as chicken projects, right? No. We're talking about taking advantage of women's advancement in education, more of them in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with chicken projects, yeah. And I'm saying that it is much broader than that. The 4G, the cyberspace, the internet allows us a lot more opportunities for economic empowerment as women juggle their reproductive and productive health needs. Not everyone is a mother, but mostly women are the caregivers in their family, right? Uh-huh. So we need to take on board how to create a more enabling space for women to be financially independent, economically empowered, and then you will see the reduction in poverty, right? Uh-huh. So those are some of the things that I think institutions like the IMF and the World Bank need to take on board. So we give lip service, yeah, but we don't actually integrate it into the policies and programs. Canada, on the other hand, has been trying. They have a feminist foreign policy, and they insist that all projects that they support need to have a gender perspective. That's helping to create a tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell will say, to make that change. The Caribbean Development Bank also has a gender policy. University of the West Indies has a gender policy, but it's work in progress. So we need to be able to build the capacity and have the political commitment at the policymaking level. And the final comment on that is women in leadership. Jamaica is said to have, in 2016, to have the highest percentage of women in leadership globally, but that is at middle leadership. we need to recognize that the structures of patriarchy are still there. Our political system, and you know, in terms of industry, private sector, it's still male dominated. The Women's Resource and Outreach Center did a study a few years ago, which we all supported, and it showed that 33% of the persons in leadership in the public sector are women, 16% in the private sector. So we're inching along,
Yes.
but we need to have much more aggressive policies and commitments to be able to radically change that whole paradigm.
Yeah. When you talk about the tipping point, though, I'm wondering, certainly in the case of Jamaica, if you have one can have the numbers and not have that tip happen because the mindset shift hasn't happened. And I'm not sure if in terms of how we're designing the educational systems across the developing countries, that there is that sense of new economic thoughts being put in place, because I've talked to young people who are just doing their bachelor's or master's and they've never heard of the concept of donut economics. I'm like, but this is like fresh stuff. So they're still talking about what was being talked about in the 1960s. I guess my question is, we see certainly globally younger females coming into power as prime ministers and members of parliament in Europe and New Zealand. And I'm wondering, now that we have more of them in those spaces, will they help to change the international conversation at that level so that it can filter down to our level in smaller countries?
I think it has happened at both levels. You have to deal with where you are locally.
Yes.
And I'm just reflecting on the experience of Jamaica having had a female prime minister, Honorable Portia Simpson Miller. She was the prime minister, but she's surrounded by a cabinet primarily of males.
Yeah.
Right? The paradigm hasn't really shifted. Power structures have not shifted. And until we recognize that those power systems have to change, we're going to see that perpetuated. So we're talking about CEDAW, the CEDAW Women's Rights Convention, saying you shouldn't have, you need to have at least 30% of women, right? It is needing a critical mass to be able to influence, There are those of us who think it should be more, because in fact we need to take advantage of the education that women have in fact achieved, certainly in our space, you know, because we have this gender differential in education, where certainly at our university is something like 60-40 in favor of women. We want everybody to be at the table and have a tertiary education and skills or what have you. So the idea is that we need to have not just women in positions of power, but women who are change makers, who are willing to tip the boat, rock the boat, to work across the political divide, to have a gender agenda for equality for all. So until that paradigm shift happens, we're likely to see maybe inching of numbers, a few more women, but no fundamental change in the whole structure of power. And we have to address that.
Yeah. So this idea of tipping point is something I've been thinking about for some time. You know, that I read somewhere in Rensselaer came up with this 10% number, that 10% of a population have to have the same worldview. So we had Beijing back in, 30 years? And so we see that there is a change. There has been a change, right? So
1995, yeah.
Yeah, so there has been a change since Beijing. So we can say, yes, something has happened since then. So now we have the 2030 as a pull. I'm wondering, with all these movements and the different movements, many people, for example, like myself, the word feminism is not something that we really, or feminist is not something that we really ascribe to. So you have all these other movements, the women in the environmental movement, in the climate justice movement, in the, in the racial justice movement. But at the same thing is, slash, I call it, there should be like a holism movement. I'm trying to start that, you know. It actually is all pieces of the same, all these threads from the tapestry of life, which we're trying to make better for more people. How do you see that we might help as women who may have that kind of a worldview, creating a replication of ourselves, then that we can have a more holism movement where women from different backgrounds working different issues begin to coalesce in ways that we have that mass of creating that future we want. How do you see that this could
Okay.
occur?
So one of the gifts that we do have,
yeah,
one of the gifts that we have, Claire, is the United Nations human rights, agreement that there are certain core human rights principles. I must declare my passion because I worked with United Nations Population Fund as an assistant representative for the Caribbean for a number of years, and I've worked and done work with various UN agencies. I think the whole concept of human rights and using human rights for your national development strategies and seeing who needs what and providing the resources to enable them to access those basic rights is what is there. I know that the concept of feminism sometimes considers it to be controversial for some, right? It really means recognizing that as a group, women are in a disadvantaged position in terms of power structure men, and taking action, being willing to take action. So in different spheres, different countries, different sectors, you have a feminist agenda, whether it's in the climate change, economics, or in the political sphere, or what have you. In the Caribbean, we look at Caribbean feminism, from the perspective of our own history. So we're a very diverse set of persons. So the experience of subordination of women is going to be in relation to race, class, ethnicity, age, disability, nationality, and so on. So you look at all of those intersecting factors and recognize that we use the tools of gender analysis to identify who needs what and integrate gender perspective policies and strategies. And that means that how you decide or you allocate the money that you do have at your disposal, So the worldview for me that you're speaking about is the human rights and the global human rights agenda. There may be some new things or what have you, but for me that works,
Yeah. I guess the issue with human rights agenda, it is not an ism. And I say that very seriously because I realize that there's something about having an ism that makes it move faster or makes it move in a different...
Like how?
I say this because when we look at, let's say, feminism, for example, or racism, for example, that term means something to some people. When you go human rights agenda to most people, it's a nice thing, but it doesn't have the same mass appeal. And part of this change process is identifying words that can help you create a story very quickly, whether the story is like a pro story or an anti story, but the story is easy to be understood and encapsulated. So I think that's one reason why I would say yes, the human rights agenda has made a difference, but you don't hear a lot of regular people go around talking about the human rights agenda. And then
well, what's interesting, you hear kids talking about their rights now, right?
That's true.
Talking about their rights. And if you look at our television, channel, people are demonstrating for rights and justice around water, light, police brutality, and what have you. So it works for some of us.
Yeah, so maybe it's not human rights, it's just the rights that work. So, okay, so rights. We can...
Rights, yes. And it says that...
Rightism.
It says that governments... people have basic rights, and we need to ensure that we create an environment where people can have those basic rights. You good?
Yes. Yes, so this issue of rights, I hear you. So then rights probably is what it is. So when you think about this then, you've been a leader. It says you were named one of the top most 100 most influential persons globally. That's a very, important designation. I think there's a lot of people in the world. So being in top 100 promoting global. What do you see as somebody who's been making change already, right? How does your personal passion for this issue guide your approach to change making? Because what you said was like, it's no point in having women in the slots who are not going to be willing to be change makers. Is change making something that is somebody's born with, or is something that we can help to inculcate in more of these women that are now occupying these seats of power or proximity to power?
Yes. I mean, as a believer, as a Christian, I believe that each of us has a purpose in life. I was totally shocked when I got that was named, and it was only for 2019, by the way, 2019. But it said to me that, yeah, 2019 was a good year because in addition to the apolitical.com, the Seroptimist International in Kingston awarded me the Stella Gregory Award for my work on gender.
Mhm.
And then the Jamaica Observer named me among the top 12. So I said, oh my God, am I going to die now? but, but really, it said that you're doing work in the trenches and you're not doing it for recognition, but it is having a multiplier effect in different ways. So for example, when I think of the resistance that we would get initially about anything to do with gender or feminism, yes, I'm seeing in my lifetime more governments, more institutions in both the public and private sector recognizing the importance of gender. And what my role is to enable and facilitate and to build capacity to do the gender analysis, train others, because I very much believe in succession planning. So for me, I'm gratified when I see students taking the baton and running with it, finding their own space. And my job is to create that enabling environment to help them. So we have, for example, Kimberly Carr, who was one of the first graduates, who was employed as our research assistant at the Institute at Mona. And she has helped in a lot of work on climate change. It has enabled her to travel and interact, but also facilitate training of others. There are men, some of the men also who have gone on to do postgraduate work. And that is wonderful. You see them growing. And in the Bureau of Gender Affairs, you see several of our graduates in the public sector, private sector. So to me, being able to use the opportunities and the space to be able to influence change, right, or advise on the integration of gender has been one of the most rewarding aspects of my work. And the hope is that people will no longer see this gender business as something off the wall. And we also insist on the empowerment where there are males who are disempowered. We need to look at what their specific needs are, and also enable them to grow. Similarly, persons with disabilities, we do a lot of work, persons with disabilities. So gender is a cross-cutting issue.
Yeah.
In the SDGs and in everything, has been a very exciting space to do research, teach, and do advocacy policy work.
If you had to pick, besides the gender issue, right? If you had to pick one issue about how we share the future, because I see the future as a shared space. So we're trying to create this improved shared space. Which issue would you think would be the most, let's say, enabling one for women to see this leap change? What are the things that will help women make this leap change in the next 10 years? Because 2030 is only 10 years away, so really.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What are things that have to happen? Right, yes.
Okay, I would like to see a major paradigm shift in education. So women have gone on to do secondary and tertiary, but is that education really preparing them for the 21st and 22nd century? Yes? Is it enabling them to think, to be problem solvers? And to me, that is what I would like to see. A change in our education system, access to education for a broader range of persons, not just an elite. But the content and the approach is about solving problems of everyday people, not for your personal aggrandizement and to get a Benz, you know, but to really see what you can do to make a change for those who are most marginalized and vulnerable.
Well, I mean, when you look at the issue, the future of work is a big conversation point right now because of the many factories around the world moving to AI and robotics, and there's consideration that there'll be a spillover effect even in developing regions where you have high numbers of young people and it's already no work. So this issue about policies is very critical. I like to use the term SMART, and I mean SMART means meaningful metrics. What are some of the metrics you think that we could have that might be important?
Matrices for there. I think we need to have what we call gender indicators. How many IT jobs, for example, how many businesses, and it's not just the jobs, it's creating jobs, because globally you recognize that more jobs are created by small businesses than by large businesses. So that is certainly one of the things that we would like to see, you know. Mm-hmm. I want to also see women with disabilities. It's International Women's Day. I'd love for men as well, but we're talking about women. And for me, we often forget that a woman with a disability also has all of those power issues, lack of a job, having to look after a family, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. But if you think of our health profile, particularly in the Caribbean, with non-communicable diseases, Claire, mm-hmm. you'll realize that our NCDs are going to make us at risk. So we need to be thinking about how are we going to cope with these lifestyle diseases while continuing to support our families, yeah? Yeah. So for me, that is one of the things that we have to do. And in fact, I'm preparing to teach a course, which I've done for the last few years on gender issues in health.
Nice.
Integrating gender in health, because our health training for our medical doctors does not allow them to see gender differentials. So I've been very exciting. We're preparing a book on that, and you know, that's really nice. God is good.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. We are being joined by our next guest for this this conversation, but I just want to say thank you to Dr. LEITH DUNN for being a part of this conversation on the futures of women and futures of women. And just to say that as we think about 2030, one last thing before we move to the second segment is what is the headline you would like to see? What is the headline you would like to see in 2030?
No violence against women.
You mean like zero, none whatsoever?
Zero. Enough is enough.
Well, good. Thank you. That's a very bold and brave statement to make. So thank you so much for that. And just saying until next time, walk good.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. God bless.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
So that's it, folks. Our conversation is continuing. We had opportunity to be with Dr. LEITH DUNN, and we will take a small break until we move on to our next guest, who will be joining us from Canada.
You have been listening to Future Sense Now with Dr. Claire Nelson, futurist and editor of Human Futures magazine. Thank you for listening. Future Sense Now, produced by the Futures Forum in Washington, D.C. is a space for story making about our shared futures to help shape the future we want. Stay tuned and stay woke. Remember, our futures are embedded in the landscape of our present stories. Seize the day, share this story, and share the future.